Hey, Mark here. I just want to give you a quick heads up. So we recorded this episode before the passing of Sean Connery in late October. So we just want to give you a quick heads up. You won't be hearing us talk about that in this episode. So I just want to let you know that we're not purposely ignoring it. We just recorded this episode before October 31st. Sean Connery was the best. We're huge fans of his. The movie landscape lost an amazing actor. But I hope you enjoy this episode of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Thanks. Hello and welcome to Movies, Films, and Flicks. I am Mark Hoffmeyer, and joining me is Dr. David and Mr. Cross.
Which one's the evil one? It's the academic, right? The academics is totally evil.
We'll never know. Just going back and forth, you're not going to know which one is Dr. David or Mr. Cross. Well, thank you for joining me, David Cross.
Right now you're talking to Mr. Doctor? Oh my God, I already lost the thread.
I just thought of this. Since you're the host of the Award Wieners Movie Review podcast, and you just released an episode about The Apartment, well, it probably came out about a month ago. Excellent episode. Now, what would a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde hot dog look like?
Interesting. Well, I think it would be... All right, I have a weird one for you. Right off the top of my head. You have to get two different types of sausages and cut them down the length, I believe it is horizontally. So you have two thin strips, and then you have to put them together.
Oh.
So you have two different types of sausages. Like for me... I would love like a white hot and then a normal hot dog, because then you get this like kind of weird, like you know what's happening because it's normal, but it's a little spicy on the other side. And then you would have to run one layer of ketchup, like the most common ingredient, on one side, and what's something that like you would not expect on the other side, like barbecue sauce, just like mustard and then barbecue sauce, and that's probably. I mean, I think I got a good one. That's probably your League of Extraordinary Gentlemen hot dog.
Dunk it in gin, then eat it. You'll never see that coming.
Dunk it in gin, you just maybe gag.
There used to be a TV show on called Enlisted that I really enjoyed with Keith David, and he wasn't even the main character. That's just what I remember. But this lady brings shots to the table, and everyone chugs shots, and then they're like, gin! And she's like, no one sees that coming.
This is a total aside from an article I read like 8 years ago, but gin... very, very British, right? It came to Britain from another monarchy, and I can't remember where, but the crux of the story is it got there Britain, and no one knew how to drink it. So they just had gin parlors, and people were just drinking glasses of gin because they didn't know. They're just like, I guess we're drinking gin now because that's what the king drinks, and it's just a cup full of gin. I know, it sounds so horrible.
My wife Megan and I, we were in London, and we had rhubarb gin. Oh man, it was one of the best gins I've ever had. I just like Hendrick's with cucumber. I'm simple with my gin. Mm-hmm. I go for that. Yeah. I love me some Hendrick's when I do that, when I'm not having whiskey. But hey, okay, so we're doing League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And I just want to say, it was sort of fate that we also covered Hollow Man, if you think about it. Because this ties in with our whole new Universal series. Was that on? Because we've never brought it up. We should start adding it into the rankings.
We should, yeah. We like started off doing Universal, and then we added this at the last second because it, like, we got how do I put this? Thematically, at least stylistically, it fits in with all our quote unquote new metal, Universal stuff. Yeah. And surprisingly, this thing has gotten a lot of love on my Instagram. People were commenting on the post that I did a few days ago after I watched this and reviewed it. Like, I was shocked by the amount of action happening.
So we've had to delay this a little bit, and we purposely scheduled this probably like a month and a half in advance because on the Blu-ray there's two commentaries, there's a lot of extras. I want to do some research on it just to have enough time. I listened to both commentaries. Mm-hmm. I did a ton of behind-the-scenes research about how Sean Connery and director Stephen Norrington almost came to blows, and how Sean Connery hated how time-consuming Stephen Norrington would spend on, say, an elephant gun. And even aside from the floods, destroying millions of dollars of sets, pushing the schedule, really messing everything up, Connery, an executive producer, made $15 million for it. Comes from another school, I think, of just kind of shoot it quick. You know, Michael Caine, Terrence Stamp, they're 1-2 takes and out of there. With Connery, he turned down Matrix, he turned down Lord of the Rings, and he'd been on huge movies before, but these are so visual effects heavy, and I've worked on visual effects movies, so I know how long each setup takes. I could see that annoying him. But I started looking into Stephen Norrington's backstory. And so this was a guy who did makeup, and he did visual effects, and he did special effects. Now, this guy did the makeup for the Grand High Witch and the Witches. He worked on Gremlins. Oh. He worked on Aliens. This guy, I mean, he did Alien 3. This dude had been on the creme de la creme of movies. I mean, Gray Stroke, all of that. What you have to realize, though, is that when you do special effects, right? When you do makeup, it's time consuming and it's very specific. It's very detail oriented. Now, I think that works when you are a makeup department or you're an indie film. But when you're helming a $95 million tentpole and you're a director who, I mean, when you did that Grand High Witch makeup, you are sitting there for hours, this micro managing this thing, the glue, the prosthetics. So when I read these behind the scenes reports and people were complaining about how everything moves at a slog and how everything moves slow, I understand where Norrington is coming from. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I do think when they had the delay on this film, that they lost several weeks. They couldn't get that back. They had a rush production schedule. I think a lot was left on the table of this film, but I also think I can understand Norrington and everything that Connery was annoyed about. Also, David Goyer said some funny things about how when Norrington met him before they directed Blade, Norrington just insulted him about his tattoos and said his piercings were better, and David Goyer's like, yeah, that's Norrington. So he's this brash guy, strong-willed guy. He will fistfight Sean Connery, but he'll also spend an hour and a half looking at an elephant gun, to the detriment maybe to the movie or not. And I loved hearing what the costume designer had to say in the commentary for this movie. I loved her attention to detail, but I think his attention to detail came at the expense of a lot of the character moments in this movie. And so when people look at this movie, and it has a 17% Rotten Tomato thing, Alan Moore's disavowed it. A lot of people aren't really fans of it. I could see how it got lost in the minutia, and then the characters got lost. And Connery, the star, the executive producer, is not too into it. There's a lot of problems on set. There's delays, and this is what you get. Now, you and I were talking, and I know I'm talking a lot, but this is a fine popcorn movie, man. I watched this, totally fine popcorn movie. You watch it, it's over. It goes by quick. There's some neat moments. There's some really neat special effects. But I think that's how this movie happened. That's my theory about this. So I've been thinking about this. I want to see what you think about that.
Yeah. So I think I agree with.
I'm just glad you didn't say. I'm just glad you didn't say no.
No. Yeah, Mark. No. And here's actually. So I think I agree with you. So he is very much into special effects. So when I looked him up, I was like, oh, he's only done like 5 or 6 movies. The major one being Blade. And the first one he did was Death Machine. And I watched that for this movie. And it is wall-to-wall action. Doesn't make any sense. Kind of boring. But it has really interesting special effects. And I feel like that's what got him Blade, which then got him League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. In terms of, why I think this movie is a little bit derided, or I guess the thing that I wanted to talk about was I feel like the studio latched onto the idea really quickly, even before Alan Moore had written the comics. Like they bought the treatment and they just went hog on it, went ham.
We need an American.
They were just like trying to push it through, and it doesn't quite. It just doesn't follow the first volume. Not that a movie has to, but it feels like they just weren't ready to produce this, right? It feels like they had this great idea, get it out there as soon as possible, capitalize off of X-Men, have another superhero movie, and it fell flat on its face.
And they just rushed it. There were 20 different scripts that they had written. They brought in someone to fine-tune it. They changed it to Nina was the lead, Nina Harker, which is awesome. I love this idea. Quartermain was addicted to heroin. But Shane West said this, if this movie was made according to the graphic novel, it would have made $7 million, which I had a good laugh about, and I want to see what you think about that. But yeah, I think, like you said, they had this great idea, but then they sort of just really homogenized it into nothingness, I would say. A popcorn movie.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that back up, because in reviewing this, I had to really think hard about how I was going to talk about it. And what it came down to was this is just an action movie. There's not really a theme to it. There's some cool parts to it. And then it completely disappeared from my mind. Prepping for this movie, this podcast, I had to flip through the movie again and read the synopsis just to refresh myself. And I had seen it just a few days ago. It's just, there's just not a lot there. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't make it bad. You know, I enjoyed myself for 2 hours, but I didn't walk away with any strong feeling towards it one way or the other.
Yeah, this movie, I mean, you never get to spend enough time with any of the characters to care about them dying or fighting or being in peril. And the villain of this film is a guy who fails constantly. He always runs away from people. So you just don't like him. And then they end up, our heroes get tricked, duped, into giving away their DNA so that super soldiers can be made and sold to governments. It's
a weird plot.
Yeah, it's but okay, I guess aside from that, because I really don't want to dunk on this movie because I enjoyed it. But I think what makes me almost like this movie is we sort of understand it, because Connery took this because he wanted a tentpole. The studio rushes into production, and it makes sense, man. This is a cool plot, and it's a good idea, and you could spawn it into spin-offs and do different things. But yeah, I don't know, but they also had some of the best talent too. So I mean, Norrington was coming off a Blade. Everyone, that movie was excellently done. I mean, like I was talking about Jacqueline West, the costume designer. She's David Fincher, Terrence Malick's costume designer. Like that's pretty huge, man. She did The Revenant, which is nuts. So you have these, I don't know, you have a lot of money. You have, I don't know, but then I guess they went to Bulgaria. All their sets got flooded, which is, didn't they say $10 million in sets were wrecked?
Yeah. It was a lot happening all at once at this film
But just imagine all your $10 million in sets get destroyed. That means your entire schedule is changed. So sets that were supposed to be built, what do you think? Sets that were supposed to be built 2 months away they had to go move to immediately. So there is like the library fight. There's a lot of empty space on that. There's just, I don't know. It's interesting what happened to this movie. And at least, I mean, despite all the problems, there's a narrative to it, I would say, even though it made Norrington and Sean Connery quit making movies.
Yeah. I think Norrington's been attached to stuff, but he hasn't made anything really since this. And then clearly Sean Connery hasn't done any live action. I think he's done some voiceover work.
This lady did The New World. Jacqueline West. That's one of my all-time favorite movies. Did you listen to her commentary at all?
Oh no. So I listened to the producer's commentary.
Can I tell you about some of it? Okay, sorry to interrupt you, man. She is so cool. So she was talking about how Connery, she had worked with him before on Rising Sun. And she knew that he is big and fearless, but he sweats a lot on set. So when you see him, a lot of his clothes are soft cotton because he gets warm on set. So when you see him, he's very layered, lightly and softly. All the belts in this movie were handmade, right? All the hats in Italy, the hats that people wear, handmade. She came up with Dorian Gray's outfit, and they wanted to make him look like a gangster, so they gave him like a pin suit. Even though at the time that didn't exist. They just, like, the actor in this who plays Nemo, he was so popular in India that one of the actors who, like, a designer who loved him so much, Nasiruddin Shah, he's so big that this guy volunteered to make, like, all of his wardrobe, like, for cheap and fast. And, I don't know, I just loved hearing her talk about it. And also, Norrington didn't come back for the reshoots on this movie. And she liked, yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, they did reshoots at the end. And all three of the people on the commentary I listened to, they all had nothing but nice things to say about Norrington. They said he's a bit of a maniac, but they didn't pick sides. They didn't, maybe NDA. But she said that when they went back for reshoots, Norrington didn't do it. And she called him to ask his blessing about certain costumes. She's like, I know this, you're not here anymore, but I'm going to send you pictures of the outfits because this is your movie. So you have this woman who is one of the best in the business going out of her way to call the director who wasn't on the movie out of respect, shows that he wasn't a total maniac, if that makes sense. And also, she had a story about how she found a oil can at a pawn shop, like an antique store. She brought it back, sat it next to Sean Connery. Her assistant tried to open it up. They brought it to special effects, and it was a grenade. And the bomb unit had to come and detonate it outside of the set. It was a live grenade. So a live grenade was set next to Connery. An assistant tried to open it. This makes me laugh that they brought it live. But yeah. I love this. Like, all this stuff that they talked about, these